Hey guys, this is the bonus tutorial for instancing and user data related stuff. And so the reason I made this video was a couple people asked a couple questions regarding the instancing workflow when I put up the YouTube preview regarding if this workflow will work with proxies, how do you make proxies with Houdini, how do you scatter more than one object using this pipeline. And so the answer is all the above can be done. And so I'm gonna just quickly cover this using our basic scene. And so I'll save this scene out, and I kind of organize the nodes and stuff a little bit more, and I'll just show you how this works. And so this one is not using material style sheets, so for this we're actually using the user data workflow, which I prefer. That's just my opinion. So if I load up the render view, you could see we have a bunch of the randomized colors using user data. And so as a quick little rehash, the way we're doing this is obviously inside here. We in the original tutorial we went over using the orient node to add some randomization, using p-scale to randomize the sizes, and creating our custom attribute of random shader with 0 to 4 options. And so that's how we went about doing that. And so let's pin this here. And so the question, we'll start with proxies. So the question was, how can we make proxies and how can we use them? So let's pause this, move this out of the way. So if you go into your object that you want to turn into a proxy, for our example we'll use this triangle, this pyramid triangle thing, and this could be any object, you know. And Redshift for Houdini has this SOP called the proxy, the Redshift proxy output. And so click on this, and basically what this lets you do is you leave this at the point where you want to export. So if you're happy with the result at this point, at the where we're at, just wire it in. And so now that you've got this connected, there's a couple options. So if you're using motion blur, you want to turn that on, deformation blur, stuff like that. For our case, we're not using any motion blur, so that's fine. There's a couple other options, like the the file name. The SOP path lets you basically select, let's say this, so you don't have to physically wire it in. I just like wiring it in just because it's easier to visualize, but you technically don't have to wire in anything. You could just search for the object in your list and it'll connect it in. There's the current frame or frame range. So if you have an animation, obviously, you know, you put in the range that you're trying to do. Couple other options in here. We have discard attributes that aren't used. So if by the end of here, you know, your attributes aren't being used somehow, it'll discard them. You can compress the file. This usually is a good thing, but sometimes due to the way the proxy gets extracted, it can actually slow down the extraction time. So it depends on how heavy your proxy is, but generally compressing it is pretty good, and it'll give you a lot smaller file sizes. The ignore object level transformations. This basically means that if you moved it around at object level up here, it's going to just ignore all this data, and so it'll just read it in from this space. Generally, the proxy pipeline, like we did with our trees, is you want to keep everything pretty much in separate scenes, so that everything's in the 0 space and, you know, it's lined up well and all that stuff. But So anyways, this is actually in the world center in here, so, and so that's fine. And yeah, you pretty much give it a name. So we'll just call this proxy 1, and that's fine. And the dollar frame, obviously that's for per frame, the frame padding, and all that stuff, like we usually have. Since this isn't an animation, it's not going to write that part out. And so if we just hit render to disk, it'll work its magic. And now if we go here, we'll see our file wherever we wrote it out to. So now we have proxy1.0001, right? And that's all. So okay, cool. So then the question is, let's instead of using this object, let's click up here. You have a couple options. There's the proxy icon. Click on that. And technically you don't have to click the icon, but it builds it for you, because all you really need is the Redshift object parameters that you could add to anything. But just clicking it this way just makes it faster. It's more convenient. And so we've got this Redshift proxy now, and we'll dive in here. And so it's blank, you know, there's nothing going on in here, and that's what you want. The way to actually load this in is you click on the object parameters, you go under proxy right here, and you have it checked on, and you look for the file. So we'll just load up the one we just made. And so let's actually disable our instances. And so right now, as you can see, there's this cube. And so the proxy is normally in bounding box display mode. You can have it in none to keep your viewport super light. And then there's mesh, which will give us the original mesh, and you can have a display percentage, so you could display less. But since there's hardly, it's just a triangle, there's only a couple polygons, it's not really going to make a big difference. And then there's points, which lets you do it by points, again, because this shape is so basic, you know, you're just going to see 3 points, and you can decrease the percentage. So we'll just keep it at the mesh, since it's basic. And so what's pretty cool is you can override the materials. You can do a lot of neat stuff with this. And normally it's from proxy, so it's going to read it, the materials that were saved with the proxy. But you could always go into full override, list override. List override's my favorite. Some of the apps don't have this option yet. I think only Maya and Houdini have. And so it gives you a list where you could just click on override, and you could quickly see, oh, this is, you know, the name of the shaders. You'll have a list of them. Right now we've only got one, which is the random shader. You can click on that, and then you could override it with a new shader that's in your scene. And so you just type it in or drag and drop it in. But anyways, we're not going to override any of that stuff, so we're going to just use the shader from the proxy. And so if we now go to our instances, and let's turn this back on. And so right now our instances are being read in using object 1. So this is our old non-proxy. And actually let's turn this into a bounding box, a cube, so you can see the difference. And so what we want to do is we want to now select our Redshift proxy. And so now the same thing is going on, except now we're using our proxy asset. And so proxies generally render faster. It feeds the data straight into the GPU, so there isn't any transformation or any of that stuff going on. And so now if we fire up the IPR, you'll see that we've got our scene. Now you might be wondering, well, what's going on with the shader? Why isn't our user data being read in correctly. And basically, one of the things about proxies, since this, you have to basically go under the proxy settings, and right here, you have to override the user data. Tick that on, and let's reload, and voila, it starts working right out of the gate. And the reason why it was all using a white shader is because if you go into matte context, our default shader down here is white, and so it's basically, if it can't read in this data, the shader switch will just use whatever's the default. So this is something to keep in mind. But yeah, if you load in your asset and you're not getting this randomization from your user data, just make sure that on your proxies you're overriding the user data is checked on. And then you could override tessellation, displacement, all that other stuff too. And if you need to use this type of data. And so anyways, so yeah, cool. That's how you create a proxy, and that's how you bring them in and still maintain all the randomization data and all that stuff and have them work as instances. And so this is pretty useful stuff to know. And for now, let's kill this now. And so there's several ways you can load in the data. So let's actually hide our proxy. So now our scene's just completely blank. So another way you can load in an object to be instance, instead of having it dragged into here, one of the methods you could use is you actually create a new custom attribute. So if we type in create, and you have attribute create node, and we connect this, activate this, it's not going to do anything right now, but inside of here now we've got the name option, and so you can type in instance. And so what this tells Houdini is basically we want to instance. And so now the class you want points, because this is all point based, we're telling it to instance on points. And so precision's fine. What you want now for the type is you want a string. And so what a string basically is it's, I'm not sure if it's vex, but it basically lets you type in commands. And so what you do is you type in dot dot slash dot dot slash. And so what you're doing is each time the dot dot slash happens, this means go up a scene level, go up. So first we have to go up outside of this node, and then go up again so that we go into object context, and then it starts listing our objects. And so here we got Redshift proxy. Hit that, and boom. So now it's here. So let's reload our scene, and that's all you need. So this way, this lets you use the attribute to instance, and that way you don't actually have to what's it called? You don't have to reference it at the instance level up here. And so another neat thing you can do is, this is the location of our proxy, and what you could do is you could actually do let's pause that. You can type in instance file, and so what this lets you do is this will let you read in the data from outside of the application. And so this lets you load it in externally from Houdini. So now if we reload this, we've got our stuff loaded in, even though it's not even, you know, visually here. And so we're loading the proxy externally. Now the downside to doing this method is that we can't override materials or the user data or any of that stuff. So if you're going to be using user data to guide your shaders, you basically can't use this method. You have to use the material style sheets method. And so if we were to go to our data tree, and actually in this scene this saved file doesn't have material style sheets, so but you get the idea. So the only way to do it, to override and randomize your shaders doing the instance file method, is you have to use material style sheets. You can't use the user data technique. So usually I don't do instance file like this. I prefer to just actually load in the proxy itself into the scene, and then that way you could just have the proxy. You could choose different methods. If the proxy's too heavy, you could just choose none, and you'll see nothing in the viewport. And you could override shaders one by one. I personally just prefer doing it this way. And so anyways, okay, cool. So now we've got, we figured out how to use a proxy, how to create them, how to import them, how to control instances and proxies externally using the instance and file instance parameter and string. And so now the next question is, let's pause this. How do I control the randomization of different objects? And so if we delete this, and let's actually break this off for now. And so let's go upper level, and let's say let's create a couple objects. Let's make 4 objects. And so let's go in here and let's actually delete the proxy output and change this to a cube. And let's unpin this so we could see what's going on. Let's delete this. Let's change this to an octahedron. And let's make sure that it's touching the center, the scene center. And so to change windows like this, just hold the space bar. This is like basic Houdini stuff, and then just press 1, 2, 3, 4. So space bar 3, the 3 key will take us to this orthographic view. And so let's transform so that we're at world center space, and we have grid snapping. To pull up the snapping tools, you could just hit the X key and then grid, turn it off, turn it on. Okay, cool. Let's delete this. This is already centered enough. Let's go into our cube here and get it to snap on our grid. Let's go in here now and change this to, let's just use the coffee pot, and let's snap this on the grid. Okay, cool. And so now we've got the 4 different objects. And so the question is, how do we instance randomly these 4 different objects? And so the way to do this is, again, using a custom attribute. We'll use another random attribute. We'll plug this in, and we'll highlight here, and we'll call this rand obj, and we'll just copy this for future reference. And so now what we were trying to do is all these points that we have will randomly instance a different object. And so in order to control this, instead of a uniform distribution, what we want is we want a custom discrete. So what this lets you do now is you'll have values, and you can add more or less. And so what you want is you want enough values to match the objects you have. So right now we have 4 objects, so let's have 4 values. And so what's important to keep in mind when doing this technique is what it's going to do is all the objects have to have a similar name. So object 1, 2, 3, 4. And what we're going to do is use an attribute to read in the number data. And so we're not starting at 0 with our objects. So what we need to do in here is value 1 has to be 1, 2, 3, and 4. So these are the values that are being created. And right now the weight, you can think of the weight as the percentage, the chance that there'll be that object. And right now the weight's 1. And so you might be wondering, like, okay, I'm kind of lost, right? So if you hold Alt and press the right bracket key, this will split your screen. And what we're going to do is we're going to load up the where is it at? The geometry spreadsheet. So this tells you all the data that's going on right now. And so if we check this out, from this point we have our p-value. So if you middle mouse click this, you see we have orient, the 5-point attributes. We have orient, p scale, random obj, the one we just made, and random shader. This is what's guiding our user data to switch shaders. P is obviously the position. We're not doing anything with that really. P scale is the scale that we randomized, and orient is the direction. So that's what each one of these nodes created, those attributes. And so when you look at the attribute, the geometry spreadsheet, you'll see all this data. So orient right here is 0, but only the y on orient is changing. And then the quaternion. And so then we have p scale, so it's randomly scaling the objects and so on. And then we have our random shader that's randomly choosing a shader. And so then we have rand obj. And so that's what we just made right here. So we have 4 values. So it's each point is going to randomly choose a 4, a 3, a 1, 1 through 4 basically. And so you can control the percentage using the weights. So if we make, let's say we make this 0.1, 0.1, 0.1, and we make this, I don't know, 7. What's going on is basically there's a 10% chance for 1, 2, and 3 each one, because it's 0.1 out of 1. And then there's 0.7. 0.7, so 70% chance that we'll get a number 4. And so if you look at the list right here on this, we notice that now we've got a whole bunch of 4s. And a couple 1s, a couple 2s, and so on. And so it's basically going on, if you scroll through here, is 70% of the points have the attribute number 4 for rand obj, and 10% have 3, 2, 1. And so now using this rand obj attribute and how we're controlling it to generate 1 through 4s, this is where this attribute comes in, and this is the instance attribute. And so you have to do, to bring in multiple instanced objects, you have to do it inside the instancer. You can't do it up here where it says instance object. It has to be done inside of here. And so we plug this in, and now we connect that. And let's pin this view so we can see what's going on. When we go in here, we'll notice that instance is blank. Now we've got the instance parameter, which is this instance, and it's empty. And that's because right now our string is empty. So now what you can do is we'll go back to how we had it earlier, where we had it doing object 1. So if we do it like this, right now we have only object 1 being scattered. And so if you look inside here, you'll notice instance object 1 that's all that's listed. And obviously you can change this to 2, and now it's object 2, and so on. So to control this, you have to feed it the attribute we created up here, rand obj, so that it'll pick one of these integers at the weight we want, the percentage weight. And so if we go up here, and now instead of a number like 1, 2, 3, 4, we use a backtick. It's the button next to the 1 on the keyboard, right above the tab key. And in here, you then type at, which is an attribute, and we paste in our attribute, rand obj, and then another backtick, and you hit enter. Now we've got all our objects. We've got a whole bunch of the teapots, because the teapot has the highest weight at 7, number 4, and then a couple of the other objects. And so you can control this. If you want them all to be equal, then just, 1, 1, 1, 1. And now every object has an equal opportunity, an equal chance to be created. And so if we look at our instance attribute, you'll notice 1, 1, 3, 1, 1, 3, 4, a whole bunch of different numbers. And these numbers right here will match our rand obj. So 1, 1, 3, 1, 1, 3, 4. 1, 1, 3, 1, 1, 3, 4. And that's how you randomize the objects like that. And so now, if we do a render, so let's bring up our render view again, and let's go back to our camera. You'll notice that we have every object and random shaders randomly scattered. And so notice how it's not just the not only the cubes are green, every object is random. And so this lets you do some really powerful stuff when you start doing this type of stuff. And it took me a long time to learn this, guys, because I'm not a coder. I don't know Vex well or any of that stuff. It took me a while to figure out how to do this with just nodes. So hopefully this saves you guys a lot of the trouble that I had to go through to learn how to do this. And yeah, so that basically helps figure that out. And so again, you could do the same thing in instead of using instance, you could use instance file, or instead of using an actual object, you use a proxy. The only rule basically is your objects that you're going to scatter, unfortunately, have to have similar names, and then use numbers to differentiate them. And this can be kind of worrisome when you have tons and tons of objects you're going to scatter. So when that happens, you should use the what do they call these? The network box. These little things, so you can be like, I don't know, tall trees or something. And that way, even though the names will be the same, you'll know that inside that box, that object kind is inside or whatever, right? It just makes it a little less confusing. And as a final note, regarding viewport performance, if you press D, which brings up the display the display options, and in here there's a section dedicated to instancing. And so there's a bunch of stuff in here. You could see, like, if you want ambient occlusion to show materials, reflections, how anti-aliasing. But what's important for us, for what we're doing, is the geometry tab for instancing. And so let's say you're on an older machine, or you're instancing way too much stuff. You can actually have a percentage here where you could choose a stand-in or to display them off, or different things. And so you could drop the percentage down to like 25, and so now only 25% of our instances are displayed, and so on. I just wanted to bring that up at the end of this little bonus video, just in case people start having performance issues in their viewport. They'll know what to do. And but yeah, that pretty much covers how to make proxies, how to load them in, how to control them, how to use randomization inside of multiple objects inside of one instance node. And so hopefully this helps you guys make some really cool scenes, scattering a whole bunch of crazy geometry and having fun. Alright guys, thanks again for all the support. I'm not exactly sure what I think I'll be covering next tutorial. A lot of people have asked about subsurface scattering and skin shading and stuff, and I might cover that. The lead developer for Redshift mentioned that ray traced subsurface scattering, multiple subsurface scattering, is supposed to be out pretty soon in one of the new versions. So I'm waiting until that is finalized, because I don't want to make a tutorial and then suddenly it's outdated and the techniques don't matter anymore. So when that happens, I'll be sure to update that, and I'll probably cover that in a separate tutorial. But yeah, that's it, guys. So thanks again for all the support, and appreciate everything, and I look forward to seeing any cool stuff you guys might make. Thanks.